In this video, I'm going to talk about Thomas Aquinas and specifically his natural law theory of morality. Aquinas was a Roman Catholic monk, a Dominican who lived in the 13th century, and he's a massively prolific genius, and arguably one of the great philosophers and theologians of the Western tradition. He's perhaps most famous for two multi-volume theology books he wrote. One is called the Summa contra Gentiles, which means against the Gentiles. And specifically, this is a work of Christian theology meant to equip Christian missionaries who are engaging with Islamic thinkers. And so there's a polemical edge to that. And then the book that we are reading selections from in your textbook is the Summa Theologia, the Sum of Theology. Aquinas occupies a special place in Roman Catholic theology because, according to an encyclical of Pope Leo XIII in 1879, he says, among the scholastic doctors, the chief and master of all towers Thomas Aquinas. So, Roman Catholic thinkers and intellectuals, philosophers and theologians are deeply indebted to Thomas, and usually in some way are followers or engaging his work in significant ways. And so his ideas still have currency and are still talked about even down to the present. So what is this idea of natural law? Well, Thomas wants to distinguish between eternal law and natural law. And by eternal law, he means God's idea or his plan for the way the universe should run. And that law is eternal because God is eternal and he's got his plans and his ideas from eternity. And then there's a natural law. The natural law and the eternal law are actually the same law, but viewed from different perspectives. The eternal law views God's plan from the perspective of God and from eternity. To call it the natural law is to view it from the perspective of the way that the creation is formed by God's plan or his idea. Natural law refers to the creature's part in the eternal law, the creature's participation in God's plan for the world. And for Aquinas, the natural law is the moral law. Those are the same thing. So his theory of natural law is his theory of morality. Now, how does this work? Well, crucial to the idea of natural law is the idea of natural inclination. The idea is that God governs the world by giving each created thing its form and its natural inclinations. That word may throw you. When I hear the word inclination, I tend to think of a desire that I have. And, I've got an inclination to go get a snack right now. But in the way Thomas is using it, an inclination is not simply a desire which a person has or even an animal has. It is a tendency, a disposition to act in a certain way. So rocks have dispositions, natural objects have dispositions, they have inclinations. Those inclinations are dictated by their form, by their nature. In virtue of the form or nature you have a certain set of tendencies or dispositions to act in a given way, other things being equal. So Aquinas says this: now each thing is inclined naturally to an operation that is suitable to it according to its form. So for example, fire is inclined to give heat. That's his idea of natural inclination. Now, when you apply that idea to humans, you've got to look at the unique and specific nature of human beings to determine what their natural inclinations are. And for Aquinas, what particularly distinguishes humans from other creatures is the faculty of reason, their rational soul. So Aquinas says this: since the rational soul is the proper form of man, there is in every man a natural inclination to act according to reason. And to act according to reason is the same thing as to act according to virtue. So you're a rational being. When you act rationally, you're doing what you ought to do. You're acting virtuously, and you're naturally inclined to do so. Now, we should distinguish here. Not every inclination that you have, much less every desire you have, is necessarily natural. So he acknowledges that people have desires, certainly, and he might even say tendencies that he regards as unnatural, as running contrary to their nature. We'll talk more about that in a second. But he says this: all those things to which a man has a natural inclination are naturally apprehended by reason as being good. And consequently, they are naturally apprehended by reason as objects of pursuit, and their contraries as evil and objects of avoidance. And here's what he means by this. If you have a natural inclination to something, then by virtue of your reason, you naturally grasp that that's a good thing for you, for a creature like you with your nature. It is pursuit worthy, and you should avoid the opposite. So let's say, for example, that I have a natural tendency to eat apples. Well, my reason would naturally apprehend, hey, eating apples is a good thing. I had to work on that, eat some apples. And I would naturally understand I've got to avoid apple deprivation. That apple starvation is an object of avoidance for me. By my reason, I would get it. And so forth. That's just one example. I mean, I don't think he would say that my nature is specifically wired for apples, but foods like that, he'd probably say. So it's our practical reason which naturally apprehends some things as good or evil. And that's the quote that I just read to you. Now, it's not enough that I understand, hey, eating apples is a thing I ought to do. Eating apples is a good thing for me. And it's something I ought to do. I also have to use my reason to figure out, well, how can I eat an apple? So first I got to figure out, where do apples grow? Oh, they grow in orchards. How can I make my way to an orchard? Well, I'm gonna have to drive there. So, I got to make sure my car's got gas in it and so forth. So I have to use my reason not only to apprehend that apples are worthy of pursuit, but also how can I get to the apples, right? How to achieve those goods, and how can I avoid, an apple famine? The apple example I just made up on the fly, so I hope that works for you. So this leads us to the first principle of practical reason, according to Aquinas, and the first precept of practical reason. Now, the first principle of practical reason is giving us the most general description possible of what's good, what's valuable, what is worthy of pursuit. And at the most general level, the good is that which all things seek after. So, if our nature inclines us and disposes us to seek after something, that is a good thing for us, for creatures like us with our kind of form and our kind of nature. Now, that's just a descriptive statement, but that is closely related to the first precept of law. That's an ought statement, a normative rule about what we ought to do and the actions we ought to take. And that first precept is, good is to be done and pursued. And by to be done, he means it ought to be done and pursued. You ought to pursue the good things, and evil is to be avoided. So whatever we're naturally inclined to, what all things seek after, that's good for us. And the first precept says you ought to go seek it. All the other precepts of the natural law, he writes, are based upon this, so that whatever the practical reason naturally apprehends as man's good or evil belongs to the precepts of the natural law as something to be done or avoided. The point is, anything that you grasp as good is something that, therefore, the natural law dictates you ought to pursue. So in my case, it might be, you ought to pursue apples, go find them, and avoid apple famine. And but if there were other things too that it said, then that the law of my nature And that's what it is. The natural law, the law dictated by my very nature, my natural inclinations would tell me, you got to go pursue that. So this raises a really important question, which I hope you're wondering about. Forget about the apple sasser. What does human nature actually apprehend as its good? Like what actually is good for humans, given the nature that we have? What ought we to be pursuing according to Aquinas? What is it that we naturally apprehend by our reason as pursuit worthy? Thank you for asking. Aquinas has some answers for you. Human nature shares many features with the natures of other created beings, but it has a distinctive element as well. So let's start with the most general descriptions, things that are most generally true about human beings and about other beings too. Every being, me, the rocks, the trees, seeks its own preservation. And by seeking, I mean, as humans, we might do that self-consciously, but the trees and the rocks aren't self-conscious, but they have a natural inclination and disposition towards self-preservation. And so the law of my nature tells me you've got to preserve your own life, seek that. That's actually an important point because, you know, that's going to obviously has implications for not only suicide, don't do it, but also I might have duties of taking care of myself. Maybe I ought to eat healthy and maybe I ought to exercise and, you know, don't jump out in front of cars and stuff like that. That's what that's going to dictate. Humans are also animals, though. That's a specific kind of being. And in common with all other animals, living beings, humans, in virtue of their nature, seek sexual intercourse and the education of their offspring that result from it, and so forth. And I think so forth is actually what Aquinas says. It's important to note here that Aquinas means that every animal seeks heterosexual intercourse in virtue of their nature. Aquinas specifically in our reading talks about what he calls unisexual desire, and he says that's unnatural. So again, this is Thomists are still involved in debates about sexual ethics today, and so it's important to note that Thomists, the natural lawyers, are going to argue in this way against homosexuality, and many contemporary people will find that you know, offensive and a point against Aquinas's theory. But I just pointed out for clarity's sake. And then finally, here's what's really distinctive about humans. Humans are rational. That's what sets them apart, according to Aquinas, from all other animals. And as rational beings have a natural inclination to know the truth about God and to live in society together. Now, Aquinas doesn't say that we have a natural knowledge of God. All he means here is that we have a natural curiosity. And he's not even asserting necessarily, so he's not saying that we all believe in God. He's just saying we all want to find out whether there is a God and what God is like. Of course, I mean, he has a very definite view of that. He thinks, yes, there is a God. If we think about it and we pursue the truth about it rationally, we will discover that there is a God and it's this kind of God and so forth. But that all of that's not quite baked in here. He's just saying we all naturally are inclined to seek the truth about God. And then we all actually want to live together with other humans, which seems plausible. So those are the things that humans should pursue as dictated by the law of their natures, by their natural inclinations. Now, humans should also pursue all the things that will help them achieve those goals. So think about it. What is it that you're going to have to do in order to achieve, say, knowledge of God or the knowledge that you need to educate your offspring? Well, you're going to have to seek that knowledge. You're going to have to get educated and you're going to have to shun ignorance. So that might mean, I don't know, you take a logic class so you can think about arguments carefully, or you learn about, you know, you're going to have to enroll at Greenville Tech so you can learn some other useful knowledge and educate your offspring, whatever. And by educating his offspring, he doesn't just mean teaching them the reading, writing, arithmetic. I think he means like the whole cultivation of a human being, I assume. If you want to live together in society with other people, you're going to have to do some stuff. You can't just go around being rude to people and punching them in the face and taking their stuff because they won't want to live with you, right? So you got to think like, all right, what am I going to have to do? How am I going to have to self-edit in order to live together in society with people effectively. All of those things are dictated by the natural law. You need to do what it takes to make this work and to achieve these goals. That's Aquinas's big picture. You've got a distinctive human nature. It's wired with certain inclinations. We recognize those inclinations as goods, and we ought to pursue them and all the steps necessary to achieve those goods. Now, there's a lot of questions that this piece of just what I've said so far about Aquinas might raise for you. So here's some things to think about. Is there really a single shared human nature that all humans have? Is that even a thing? Are there universal goals that all properly functioning humans naturally seek? Are there universal natural inclinations? Or are we all incommensurately different? If there are such universal goals, what are they? We've just seen Aquinas's account of what they are back here. We want to seek our own preservation, sex, education of offspring, knowing the truth about God, and living in society. That's his account. Is he right? Should we add any? Should we take any away? What do you think? Ponder these things, and we will talk about the rest of his theory in the next video.